Welcome to the 8th edition of Novethic's annual event. I'm very pleased to welcome Peter Jensen. Hello, Peter. You are CEO of PKA.
Yes.
And beside you, David Russel. Hello, David. You're CEO, Head of Responsible Investment of USS Investment Management. Peter, first question for you. As a Danish pension fund, what is the impact of the commitment of the Danish government to become carbon neutral in 2030?
Of course, it's a Danish pension fund. It's important then that the Danish government has set at the direction, and we know where Denmark is going to go. But we are actually most a global investor. So for us, it's also enormously important what happens in EU and also what's going to happen in Paris at COP21. So we are glad that the Danish government have a goal. But for us, it's also important to have an international goal in that area.
David, as a shareholder, how do you work on climate change issues?
I think it's important to recognise we're an asset owner, an investor. We're not just a shareholder. So we look at climate change related issues across our different asset classes. So for public equities, we do engage with companies on how they are addressing climate change risk and opportunities. In our private equity portfolio, we look at how companies are addressing climate change in our due diligence process. In our real estate portfolio, we have targets for reducing energy consumption of the buildings that we own. In our infrastructure portfolio, we address climate change in the assets that we are managing, but also in our due diligence in terms of assessing climate risk before we invest. So it's a broad range of approaches to addressing climate risk in the assets that we invest.
And what are your green investments?
We have a number of green investments or investments in renewables and green technology. Our first investments were made in 2000 actually in technology funds looking at energy efficiency and new sources of energy. We also have investments in renewable infrastructure in UK, Spain and other parts of Europe, and we've recently invested £300 million plus in a wind farm debt portfolio supporting 30 wind farms across the UK.
Same question, Peter. What are your green investments?
We have green investments in many areas, but the most important ones are in wind parks, offshore wind parks where we have built up a portfolio in Northern Europe. And we also have green bonds and sustainable forestry.
And David, do you think stranded assets are a material risk for a fund like yours?
I think you cannot argue with the mathematics. The sums are, if we burn all the reserves that we have in our coal companies, in our oil and gas companies, we will breach the 2-degree level. I think how stranded assets plans out between the different asset classes is different. For coal, I think it's more of a risk. For oil and gas, in the short to medium term, I don't think they're as exposed. So I think we need to look at it in two different ways. Some assets are more exposed than others.
Would you say that because of your nature, you're working differently as a pension fund and a private asset owner?
I think we're very similar, actually. I work for USS Investment Management. We're the fund manager for a pension fund, USS, the pension fund, University Superannuation Scheme. So although I work for USS Investment Management, we are the main investor for a pension fund, the USS itself.
So it's the same, spectacles.
Yeah, I think what's common for us is that we have the long-term spectacles, and also that we know there are some beneficiaries that they have a view on how we are going to invest their money. And I think it's important, and both give us a direction on how our investments are going to be.
And this direction should come from the government or from the asset owners?
At PKA, it should actually come from the asset owners as beneficiaries, because we are actually member-owned. Of course, it's important that government set the framework and set the direction, but we have to follow up with investments and based on the views on our beneficiaries.
Do you share this opinion?
We have a slightly different structure in that we're covered by UK trust law, and the trustees are those responsible for taking the ultimate investment decisions for and direction for the fund. But picking up the point, policy is absolutely critical in changing the way the world looks at climate change, the world manages carbon, and we as investors play a significant role, or need to play a significant role, in encouraging policymakers to move in the right direction.
Peter, some investors, many of them in fact, still think that green investments are risky. Do you share this opinion?
No, actually I don't share that opinion because when we make a risk analysis, when we analyze our assets seen from a risk point of view, we actually can see that, for instance, our equity investments, our private equity investments in many scenarios are more risky than investing in the green area. For instance, investing in a green bond are not especially risky, or investing in a wind park where you have a government subsidy. Of course, there is a risk, a political risk. So maybe in the green area, the risks are different, but not necessarily higher than in the equity area.
Could you quote return on investment on a specific green investment, or do you have an example?
I would say that if we look at a wind park, we would look for an investment return at around 7% plus minus 1 or 2, depending on the special park and what kind of risk we are going to take. And that I think is a quite good return.
One last question for you, David. Universities are targeted by campaigns of divestment. What is your position on this particular subject?
So on divestment, we're guided by the legal advice that we've been given as a UK pension fund. And that advice is that currently we can't take ethical investment decisions. All our decisions need to be made on a financial basis. That absolutely doesn't mean we cannot take ESG issues into account in our investment process. We have and do and have done for over a decade. There is an issue at the moment in that the Law Commission in the UK published some guidance on how we should be addressing fiduciary responsibility and ethical investments. The government was expected to provide more legal advice around that and has decided not to. So currently, how we should be interpreting that part of fiduciary duty is not clear, and we're working on that.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you.